Woohoo! All right. Hey, neighbors. Good to see you guys. Uh, the reason that I decided to have a discussion around this particular fire, even though we've had quite a few, is that there are so many different factors that funneled into this. And the reality is that we had a heads up on the fire starting in the middle of the night, but did not get eyes on the fire until morning around 8. And then there was a very big challenge for CAL FIRE and the other resources to get to the fire. So I really wanted to take a look at how our smoke detectors are working, how our radios are working as a network, as a way to say, what did we find out from this fire and how can we improve together? Because the whole process of learning to live with fire is just that, learning. And so this one had a lot of intriguing aspects to it. So let's click on ahead. If I can figure that out. And like I said, I'm recording this so that other neighbors who wanted to be here tonight, could have a chance to hear what we have to say. This is a kind of more informal discussion. So if you guys have comments as I go along, please feel free to take yourself off mute and jump in. But I'm basically going to start with the end, the outcome. So the outcome was, yay. Good news is the fire was contained. But there were over 20 people on it, and it was about 2 acres. So this obviously is from Ubinet, which does a great job of sort of doing the blow by blow as they hear it on the CAL FIRE. I do reference them a lot because we're usually in it. So we're, dealing with the fire and not necessarily capturing the screenshots. Again, like I said, the end of the story is that the early detection with the smoke detectors, while not perfect, certainly gave us a heads up and gave us, an indicator that something was happening. And we'll talk more about that. I worked with CAL FIRE on a variety of things as a postmortem on this fire. One of them was getting an estimate on how much this fire cost. And it cost, at the time, they haven't had a final report on it. But, oh, hello, radio. At the time, it was estimated at $200,000, which is considered extremely expensive for a 2-acre fire. And the reason for that is because they had so many air resources over it. So our CAL FIRE Chief Chiswick gave me some standard rates that they use for that. And so he was able to configure it really quickly. Our FireWise framework, which, I'll reference again later, but the technology we have with our neighbors and everybody sort of being on board to help is really working. If we ever face a really big fire, we're going to definitely learn from this one on how to respond and so forth. So it's really helping us fine tune, these smaller fires, they're not scary, but they're helping us fine tune our system and our response. The other key takeaway that I want to continue to highlight is there were significant access issues. And all of you guys on the call have heard me say and know that we are working toward hopefully someday getting that bridge reinstalled across Steep Hollow. This fire here will be a case study if ever we apply for a grant. That is the goal. OES knows that. Chief Landon Hack from CAL FIRE, who our battalion chiefs report up to, he keeps lobbying for us to get that bridge back because his firefighters and stationed over in Alta could have dropped down to that fire in minutes instead of hours. So it's not a small issue. While this stuff matters for us when it comes to sort of our neighbors, is that we are, learning the sensors for a community perspective. Like I said, they're not perfect. This is a brand new program for Know-Wildfire and N5 to have communities engaged. We are the guinea pigs, right? So when we have issues with the sensors or the app, they're looking for our feedback to improve. But the radios with the apps together are even more powerful. And as we start to fold in and work toward having, some of our team trained up to respond, that'll even be the third prong of this. So I presented this to the county FireWise communities last week. So they don't know UBET as well as we do. And I think every time I share this particular map with most of our sections broken out, people are just blown away because whether you guys, recognize it or not, each one of those colors is a separate section, and the parcels on the right. So our neighborhood leaders who like online here, like Holly and some of the others, they each have a responsibility for a section which has the same amount of parcels and acreage as almost every other Firewise community throughout Nevada County. So when I say that we're basically 20 Firewise communities rolled into one, this is what it looks like. And obviously it's definitely quite a feather in our cap that we're able to have such a tight network with that many communities. Some of you guys have seen this before. This is a graphic that I put together for an event that they were saying, hey, what do you guys do in UBET? What's your program? I'm like, oh, we have a program. So I turned it into a program. So our program over the last few years, upper left, yellow, starting with 1, we really focused in on defensible space and home hardening and making, home visits, which we still do today. And that was job 1, is to help get neighbors to start to create an environment on their property where embers would not necessarily burn down their house. Then the point number 3, obviously the big aha for me was that our roads are not safe as they stand for evacuation. So I've been on a bit of a warpath, not just in UBET, but at the county level, around what we need to do to be clearing our roads to be safe for us to be able to drive out. Number 4, it's perfect. It's 4. We're in our 4th wildfire season with our radios, which is quite another coup for us. We have over 100 households, and obviously there's a core, but a lot of folks actually listen in without ever chiming in, which is great. And every time we have a fire on Sunday nights, we do the weekly nets. And as some of you know, I ask, how did you first hear about the fire? It seems like once a week. And it's pretty much trending that for the radio holders who are monitoring regularly, it's their first notification. It's not Watch Duty, it's not Ubinet, because those guys are hearing the same thing that we're hearing from a CAL FIRE dispatch. So really powerful. This year we melded in the early warning smoke detectors, and also we're at the very first step of a long journey with building out a quick response team. So that's what the program looks like, kind of 1 through 6. I think it's cute. It's a nice graphic, and I figured out how to make it, so I was very proud. Learning new skills. I'm an old dog learning new skills every day. To drill into the Lowell Fire and any fire that we have and what that looks like, it's these 3 kind of components that are working together. So it's the sensors, the rapid response, the responders, and the radios. I think some of you guys have seen the pictures before, but on the upper left, if you haven't, that's what our sensors look like. And they're installed throughout UBET. Upper right, of course, is our Wushan platform radio. And the bottom photo was during our wildland firefighter training in the spring that the Healthy Forest Alliance, the nonprofit, conducted for us and trained up a bunch of us. So that's us in action. Sorry about the barking. The sensors themselves, I think a lot of you have, either attended some of our program overviews, but just as a quick reminder, these sensors were put in place in conjunction with CAL FIRE and Peardale Fire Department, and they helped us configure where we located them. So the key thing here is that these are based on fire behavior and where the experienced firefighters said most of the, fire pathways are. So that's why we ended up putting them there for early warning systems. So, Holly, I can see you. Can you guys hear my dogs barking? Shoot. Okay. I feel like I should pause. It bothers me. I was just hoping it wouldn't bother you.
No. KC, it's really in the background. You're fine.
Okay, thank you. It distracts me, and Mike went out to the fire burn with Rich. He's down in Greenhorn. So yesterday's fire, they're out checking it out. So the dogs are thinking they're coming home, and that's why they're barking. Anyway, so the goal, of course, with these sensors was, this is part of the launch slide that I put together, way back when. So I just mentioned strategic locations. build a connected community so that, if somebody smells or sees smoke, we can communicate via the sensors. And then, of course, the last component is, obviously, we're still working through it, but the fire departments, CAL FIRE, has access to those sensor alerts too. So we're working on, how do we tie that out more effectively? But they do have the ability in their emergency command center to check out, the same alerts that we have. And again, if you haven't been a part of the alert program, each time these sensors sense wildfire smoke, they have an either orange or red alert, which is different degrees of certainty about the smoke they're detecting being a wildfire or just potentially regular smoke. And then when we as neighbors go in and make observations or comment on that, so if we go check out a smoke sensor, which has the kind of, icon emergency exclamation point, if one of us comments, then we get the little person and little bubble pop up. So when we see that on a map, we know that somebody has taken a look at that particular smoke sensor and responded. All right, so let's jump into the Lowell Fire. It was Wednesday, July 16th. This is a compilation of data points from a lot of different sources, and it's not even comprehensive, for just brevity on a slide, just wanted to sort of make one huge key point here. The key points are that the smoke alerts first triggered at 12:09 a.m. Note the geography. This will be important. Rollins Lake. So down at Rollins Lake. And if you remember, we'll have maps in a moment, but the Lowell Fire was up toward Chalk Bluff and Dutch Flat, right? So then the sensors continued to trigger, but moving up the Bear River. There were multiple 911 calls reported into the 911 system. The folks I've talked to who called 911, we actually have more calls than they reported out, but they started at 221. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this 2:56 a.m. hotspot a bit later. 4:10 a.m., I think that might be our neighbor Dustin, who's on the call, made a resident report into the sensors. And then around 6:30, I was down in Southern California and woke up and saw alert after alert after alert on the smoke sensors. And so I instantly called Mike and started, hey, what's going on? And started probing. So from 6:30 forward, we knew something was happening. We just didn't know what. And we'll talk about why. And then the other critical factor was Logan Tony, who was on Chalk Bluff early in the morning, saw visible smoke, called 911. And when he got to his property, which is further north on Chalk Bluff, he was almost directly across from where the fire was. And he called back confirming that it was not just drift smoke, but that he could start to see a plume and start to provide location information. So basically, when we looked at all of this, and that 8:53 call, access from the Placer side, that was Mike up on the ridge making that call. And at 9:22, then the full wildfire response was launched, because previously the supposition was that it was just drift smoke because there were a lot of fires in Northern California at that time. All right, so big shout outs to everyone who helped, contribute information to this puzzle. I mentioned Dustin already, who was kind of like, I know you're on, Dustin, I'm just going to say it. I love the fact that you haven't lived here very long. You let us put a sensor on your property, and you got up in the middle of the night to check it out when the alerts went off, and you called 911. Do you want to say anything about that? You're on mute if you do. You have to take yourself off mute. And if not now, maybe later. So there were a lot of other people who were texting and calling. Oh, Dustin, there you go. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about—
I figured it out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, actually what transpired?
So from our perspective, yeah, we started actually getting smoke in our home around midnight, and the sensor started going off. But it was kind of one of those things. Again, we were thinking drift smoke. There wasn't really anything we could see because we actually have a good view over the Bear River. And then when they started going off at 4 a.m., the entire canyon was full of smoke. So obviously something was going on. Casey has always told us to look what kind of smoke. So we were looking at that. We couldn't see any, flames because it was dark. So no light, and we couldn't see any plumes of smoke. It was just, in the canyon. So that's kind of when we called to say, hey, something's going on, but we don't know where or what. And then later found out kind of what the fire did, which was weird. So I'm glad the sensors are there, and they actually went off yesterday again. Still some issues with them. We didn't get a notification yesterday, but I'm glad they're working.
Thank you, Dustin. And again, thank you for, it's interesting because I hearken back to 2 summers ago when we had the lightning strike on Brad's property. And it was during this massive deluge of a rainstorm, like 6 inches of rain in, an hour and a half. It was just a deluge. And Mike's the one who discovered it. It's like, hey, it's smoke. Hey, it's a lightning strike. And we got to call 911. And Brad was like, no, we could handle this. No, it's a lightning strike. It's down in the roots, right? So we have to understand that it's okay to call 911, and it's absolutely critical. And Dustin totally did the right thing on that. So let's go through the sensors themselves, because this was the part that was really confusing and we didn't figure it out until after the fact. So this shows the 3 sensors kind of down by Rollins Lake. The middle one is, I believe, up at your property, Dustin, and the further one, I think, is on Crystal's property, which is off of Brady Road in Chalk Bluff. And that's the sequence in which the sensors went off. So they went from south to northeast. I just like to say south to north. So when we looked at these sensors in the morning, we were looking for fire kind of like where the river fire was, right? So Chicago Park, the Bear River campground, and looking for any indication that there was a fire start below us, more southerly, that would have made that drift smoke come up. When we take a look at, a kind of a zoom in on that, you can see now more of an overhead look, a little bit closer. People, all of us were, this is little black icons are all making comments on these things saying it's drift smoke, because at the time, like I said, that's what we all thought it was. And 911, when Dustin and others called in, we're also saying, no, nothing's happening. We don't have the best Alert California camera coverage in the U-Bed area. So there was no cameras at the time verifying it. But you can see that, from midnight all the way up to 6 o'clock, neighbors were reporting out because the alarms kept going off. This is a kind of a bigger picture view, which, looks like a little bit of a cluster, but I think it's good for you guys to also see. The bottom blue targets, all of those are actual sensor placements, and those are on the Placer County side, and Colfax is trying to, get more property owners to support this program and get more sensors in. But, that's where the thinking was that the fire was coming from down that direction somewhere. But that's just for context. So then this is now jumping ahead a bit. This is an example of that type of drift smoke. So this is Logan Tony, who lives on Chalk Bluff, putting it on Facebook. And at the same time, I was talking to Mike, and I saw Logan's Facebook post pop up. And I always say, consider the source. Right? This is not a person who runs around and says the sky is falling. This is a credible person who has 2nd generation. The Tony Enterprises does mastication and tree work and burn piles, and they know fire. So when he said he thought it was fire, instantly the hackles on the back of my neck from Orange County go up and we're like, ready, go time. But the interesting thing is to look at that smoke and recognize that what happened was the smoke from the actual fire had gone up in the air overnight and gone down. And then in the mornings when the winds change and it comes back up the Bear River, that's why the sensors triggered from Rollins Lake up. Does that make sense? but nobody thought of that. Nobody. So this is what it finally looked like. The first Alert California camera snapshot, 8:46 a.m. And they started, saying, okay, it's legit, it's a real fire. What I want you guys to look at is, I believe, actually, I can't tell you which direction it is, but you can see the drift smoke in the nearest valley, and then the multiple ridges. Those ridges became the reason why resources could not get to the fire from the U-bet side. Can you guys see that? So the ridges in the picture, like 1, 2, 3. So it was in between the third ridge. So when Mike called in 911, that's when he told them, because Mike knows down in these canyons like the back of his hand on ATVs and side-by-sides, he knows no vehicle could get through there. So he told them at 8 something, you got to go to the Placer side. But because Logan, when he called it in, they required him to give an intersection. So he told them Chalk Bluff and Lowell Hill, which that's where all the first wave of resources came to. And none of them except one dozer was able to get across down Lowell Hill and across the steep hollow and make an inroads to the fire. So this is just another view of what we saw. And again, it's just, that thing smoldered for, at this point, it's 9:43. So the first alert on the smoke sensors went off at midnight. That thing had to have been smoldering since early evening of the day before. I mean, that just blows my mind. Okay, so now we're going to jump into kind of what transpired a little bit with the watch duty. Emphasizing that watch duty only starts to post fires up once the dispatch has been called out to CAL FIRE and local agencies. So they don't have any sensors. They don't have any ability to identify a fire in advance of it being called in and CAL FIRE authorizing a response. So we were working on the fire and trying to identify it and communicating via radios probably 2 hours before it hit watch duty. So again, just gives me chills. On the left side of this screen is what I just said in terms of the fire location is Chalk Bluff and Lowell Hill. So that fire symbol there, that's where it is, because that's where Logan Toney called it in, because he was on Chalk Bluff. And what 911 says is, what's your location and what's the nearest cross street? He said he kept saying it's not here. But he couldn't tell him where it was because it was sunk down in those 3 ridges we looked at. On the right side screen photo, you can see that the Lowell fire is now way over there by Steep Hollow. So it relocated from what I've circled here to there, and that's 3 ridges across. So again, this really shows how resources came up U-bet Road on the left, dropped down Lowell Hill to Steep Hollow, got stuck, could do nothing. And for those of you who were listening to dispatch during these hours, as I was, they finally got sent away. So people were thinking, oh, the fire's good. Well, they got sent away because they couldn't do anything. So then they redeployed new resources to come in from the Placer side and come to access the fire from there. So what that looks like when we zoom in, upper left, where it was reported, no bridge. Big part of the story. That bridge was there. We could have just zipped across, right? Everybody could, gotten there some way, somehow. So moving on, I want to move into the satellite hotspot. So the hotspot thing came from me. Again, I wasn't home, but what I did was we talked about our tools and how to use the different tools. As soon as I got the alerts from the smoke sensors and talked to Mike, I was on watch duty and I had Broadcastify on. So you can go to and listen to Western Nevada County CAL FIRE dispatch off of Broadcastify, just like we can listen to it on the radios. So I spent the next 3 hours listening to Broadcastify dispatch and the overhead incident command. He was in a plane or a helicopter, and they were trying to locate the fire for a couple of hours. And I was tapping my finger on this little visual on the left-hand side, the orange kind of smudge there. I was tapping my finger on that a good hour before watch duty populated it with a fire. And I kept saying, what's that? What's that? That's a satellite hotspot. So basically it's a heat signature from the satellites that go around, and watch duty it automatically, if they happen to pick it up, nobody's monitoring it. It's just there. So subsequently, after the fire and part of the debrief, I met with our CAL FIRE Chief Chiswick to talk to him about this. And they don't have that on the operations side. So our guys that come out and the firefighters to put them out, they don't have that. So that information is embedded, and it includes latitude and longitude, which means that had I known that, I could have called back to 911 and I could have said, hey, the heat signature is here. You've got a guy in an airplane trying to direct fire resources to this fire and they can't get there. Here's where it is exactly. Once the guy in the airplane, was able to see the fire, he kept trying to direct him, but there was no access. So that heat signature thing is something that is absolutely going to be critical going forward. And then I backed out, and our friend Rob, I don't think he's on the call tonight, but Rob is one of our techie neighbors. He went and found for me the actual data points on that hotspot. And it was initially acquired, meaning it was detected at 2:56 a.m. Or acquired at 2:56 and detected at 3:43 a.m. So all the time that these sensors were going off, this information was available to someone somewhere, but they weren't tied out. So kind of intriguing, right? I feel like a mystery sleuth on this. So to summarize what we used in terms of all of these tools, the thing I want to emphasize is it's not just one thing. It's the smoke sensors. The Facebook community page is incredibly active. That's where Logan first posted up that he had called 911. And without that, I don't know that we would have triggered it. We were still thinking it was drift smoke. Phone calls and texts between everyone. I instantly, call people I know who are in location that don't have the radios. In this particular fire, that was, Virginia, Tony, and Hillary and Eric, people up Chalk Bluff. The resident teams that, got ready and prepped and put on their PPE and got their water tanks ready to go out, our radios, and then broadcastify and watch duty. But I think the story here, is that any one of these tools by itself is not enough, and so our ability to stitch them together and ask questions and not make assumptions is really powerful. You guys have heard me, talk about all the different tools. This was the first time for me, while I've used Broadcastify quite a bit, that it was, critical. And I got to give Holly some credit, because instantly, when we knew something was going on, I asked her to play net control on the radio. And the reason I picked Holly is because she lives down on Sherbet. So she was nowhere near where the fire was, and likely never would be. But, people who are up close to the fire running around and, you're in it, right? So I was able to monitor Broadcastify and then text with Holly and make sure that we were giving good updates to the radio network too. And I thought that worked really well. The hot tip for you guys is on watch duty. Couple things. It is still the backbone and the best aggregator of data that exists. And because it has push notifications, make sure when you go in, open your watch duty, go to your menu, find your notifications and click on Nevada County and make sure that you have the silent notifications enabled. Those are the small fires that don't yet make it to kind of everyone. And they're the ones that will disappear once they're out. I just, as a best practice on adjacent counties, Placer and Yuba, I have it toggled to first notification only, because we butt up against Placer. There could be fires that are literally in our backyard, but most of them aren't. So I just look at it and then it goes away unless I click on follow that particular incident. And then the last piece is you have to toggle on the satellite heat signatures, and that is under layers. So notifications is under your menu, and then on the right side, there's layers, and you want to click on both of those to turn on the heat signatures, and they only appear when a satellite goes over and actually, picks up a heat signature. So it's not something you can find forever, which is why I was tapping the screen going, what is that? What is that? Before it was even on watch duty, because I knew exactly where the fire was because Logan gave us pictures. So I knew exactly where to look, which was the craziest experience. All right, so just to sort of summarize the key learnings, satellite hotspots are the hot tip. The 911 cross street thing, I think we need to be a lot more firm when we call in that, we're looking across 3 ridges and it's, 3/4 to a mile away. Don't come here, especially in UBET when they come up Chalk Bluff, they can't cross down there. For me, the other piece was look up, down, and all around, right? So we kept looking to Rollins Lake, or I mentioned, the Bear Campground for a fire source, did not turn around, not literally, but did not turn around and start looking north. So when we send patrols out to go looking for fires, we tend to go right where that smoke sensor is, which is the right thing to do. But if we don't find anything, we can't assume that doesn't mean anything. We have to then look around. Trust your gut. For me, that was, the hackles when I saw the 3 smoke alerts had gone off and that everyone was talking about it being, dispersed smoke. My gut was saying, no, it's not, but I had no information to inform that. And then local knowledge matters, so when Mike knew that the resources could not get across Steep Hollow, he stood at the top and he was redirecting resources and stopping them. But they were, they were committed, but that's an important factor. And then the last one, I said, consider the source, knowing that it was Logan and the credibility that he holds regarding understanding what fires look like. When he said there was a fire, I said, there's a fire, right? There was no hesitation or second guessing. And by the way, you guys, that's no different than yesterday with, Kelly Hosfeld. He said he saw drift smoke and then he called me back and said, I'm seeing a plume. Consider the source. Kelly knows what he's talking about too. So from my perspective, that's kind of the debrief on the Lowell fire, but the key lessons, there's so many takeaways. So want to open it up to you guys. What is your sort of reaction, response, first thoughts to all of this? Anybody?
Hey, see, I have a question.
Yep.
For watch duty, in regards to the silent, I think that only works on a phone, not if you're working from the browser version of watch duty.
Okay, I don't know that. I would have to check, but I use watch duty on my phone.
I know, and I like to use it on my if I'm watching a fire, I like to, if I'm home, I'll look at it on my computer because I can see better.
Right, of course.
So I just went in there to find that. I couldn't find it. On my phone, I have those settings set. So I thought, oh, well, I'll put it on. I couldn't find it. I could spend a few minutes and do a help type of thing, but that's what I observed.
Okay. Other questions on the fire itself, guys? Comments, feedback, your thoughts, what you thought when it was happening?
Yeah,
what you think about? Yeah, hi, Katie.
Hi, Casey. So I'm kind of shocked that some of the tools that you started using, that hotspot and something else, I can't remember exactly what it was.
Broadcastify?
That wasn't part of the firefighting systems that they use those tools. I was kind of shocked. Have they now? Has this been made aware to them to where this can kind of they can change their firing tools?
So if you're talking about the satellite hotspots as an example, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why, we're putting together this case study is the intelligence team. CAL FIRE has, people sit around and look at the computers and like a cockpit with flight radar and all these other things up there, right? So they have the information, but bridging that to operations is the gap that we identified through this particular fire. So yeah, that's been, you know, run up the flagpole, and hopefully they'll figure out a way to make that happen. I was pretty shocked too, and so was my chief Chiswick. He was like, I can't believe that was there and available, you know. And so, you know, one other kind of note, just a not part of the presentation, but when I met with a guy from CAL FIRE down in Auburn, he works in logistics and supply, and that fire was so inaccessible, even though it took him so long, you know. And I was listening, as I'm sure some of you were, to the incident command and from Tahoe National Forest in the plane, trying to direct the trucks and firefighters to get there, and they couldn't. So they ultimately had to leave all of their engines and stuff like a half a mile away and hike in. And so they used up all their hose to get there. And so the guy from Auburn, he literally had a pallet of hose, which is a massive amount of hose, and delivered it to the fire so that they could get the hose lay around the 2 acres. So when I say there was it was a complicated fire, and it was crazy, and I still to this day don't know, but I heard him call out, the guy from incident command was amazing. He says, okay, so we've got a lift off from White Cloud with 8 souls on board. Well, what 8 souls on board are the heliTAC, so the repeller firefighters, the ones who get dropped into inaccessible areas. And I've heard from some CAL FIRE sources that they were deployed, and from some others that they weren't, so I still don't know. But I know that they had to hike in, and so again, it's a small fire, but all of these details add up to a really intriguing story, so we didn't want to let it lie. Yeah, Holly.
So, the location and the weather,
Yep.
it certainly had to have been human caused. What was there any ever anything any? It just makes me think it can happen again. I know that
It
there's
will.
been a homeless camp up there, and I'm wondering. Yep, is that what?
Yep. So yeah, so that area has a reputation for fire starts. There's been dozens of them over the last 7 years. Most of them are human ignitions, and most of them are either campers with illegal fires or homeless camps. This one, the supposition was that it was a homeless camp. What I can also tell you is when I got back in town, Mike and Joanne Feitz Kaufman, our mentor, fire scientist, fire forester gal, she came out on a Sunday, and the 3 of us rode in the side-by-side trying to get to the burn scar. We couldn't get there. We followed the bulldozer track. That's how I know the bulldozer actually made it super far. I don't think they got to the fire. And then we couldn't get to the burn scar directly, but we found some campsites with like a 20 to 30 foot downed tree log that was completely burned. And as we pulled up to it, I smelled wet smoke instantly. I'm like, oh, this is recent. So it was below where we knew the burn scar was. And with the wind blowing that direction from north to south, that would be exactly why embers probably caught, and then why it smoldered and took so long to ignite. So that's the working theory, and we may never actually know. Questions, comments, observations?
Yeah, I have a comment. This is Dustin. I just, wanted to thank everyone that actually was involved because, again, being a new resident up here, I grew up in a forest and dealt with all of this, but being a new homeowner and all of it's a little bit different. And, between all of the tools that we were given and having that sensor put on our land and things like that, just knowing where all the pieces were and listening to the radios and having all of that communication and leadership, we never really got nervous. So it was just very comforting as a new homeowner. And I just want to really thank the whole neighborhood for it.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin. To that point, there's another little tidbit. We have a long-term neighbor that had been living up in the Mulberry area, and he and his family were looking to buy a home. And he was in escrow on a house down in Lower Colfax. He wanted to stay in UBET, and I'm happy to announce that he closed and is living on bought a property on Royal Flush. And this network that we've put together is a huge reason why he wanted to stay in UBET, which is just mind-boggling, you know, that people are making real estate decisions because we have the strength of this community. I'm gonna cry.
It's been one of the suggestions to our friends that are looking for property, saying this is why we feel comfortable living out where we do, where they're looking where there isn't that support around them. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a big
yeah.
difference.
Yeah, no, it's you know, and it takes a village. It takes a village, and we've got a good one. So just want to say thank you. I know a couple people are dropping off, and appreciate everyone jumping on this call tonight.
Casey, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
What is the threshold of when you were going through the timeline, it seemed like it was kind of scary how long it took for them to decide. Again, I can't remember how long we need air support now. What's the threshold of, seems like there was an awful long time for them to make that call.
Yeah, so the you know, recognize that the 911 calls where no one, multiple people called, were not able to definitively state that there was a fire, right? So they always ask, do you see smoke? Do you see fire? The other piece of it, and I need to figure out how to communicate this to everyone, but the reality is that the planes don't go up right away. They don't just, oh, well, we might have a fire, let's get the planes out. There's a limited crew. And so depending on if they've been on fire events, they're timed out. They can be scheduled for early up on existing events that maybe they were working on the day before. But so the planes and the, you know, Grass Valley Air Attack is not ready to go until a time, whether that's 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. They did go up early, you know, because once it was a confirmed fire, they called them in because they know that it's inaccessible. And that section, you know, of the Bear River, if it goes, if, you know, it's not us, it's Greenhorn and Banner. And if that goes, then Grass Valley and Nevada City go. So there's a lot of attention to it, but Holly's point is well taken. You know, with the fire yesterday, you know, we had neighbors who knew that there was partiers down in Greenhorn starting Friday night. Mike went down, took pictures. There's 26 vehicles parked down there. Is that fire started by them? We don't know. But there's a history and a culture of recreational use in both the Greenhorn and Bear River. So weekends in the mornings, it's possible we're going to have fires. It's not our first and it won't be our last. The good news is these are all small. I'm glad Dustin feels comfortable. To me, these are all rehearsals because someday we will face another event that is going to terrify us. But if we have rehearsed and understood our information sources and what that means for us to do, we will each be better prepared and together be better prepared to hopefully have an impact on that fire in our community, and B, get the hell out of Dodge. So in the meantime, you know, we got to keep working on reducing the ladder fuels and the trees and the vegetation and harden our homes. First up, Doug, go ahead.
So I just have a question, a kind of general knowledge question.
Yeah.
So we've had quite a few fires this fire season, little fires start here and there. I'm just wondering what percentage or how many of those were first reported by somebody on this GRMS network?
First reported to 911.
First reported to 911.
I don't know that, but I would say a good portion. But just as an example, yesterday's fire, Kelly's not on the radio system, but he was the first caller to Anathea, knowing she had radios, and she got on the radio right away. And then, you know, she and I talked and yada, yada, yada. So the radios are like becoming, and I encourage everyone, yes, call 911 first, but also then pick up the radios because we're closer.
Yeah.
Holly, you had another comment?
Doug, mute yourself, else we're going to have a conflict.
Can you hear me now?
Mute. There he goes. Okay. So I know lots of fires. I think we dodged a bullet with that huge lightning storm we had last week. That was that was really tremendous. And the weather is reporting that we could possibly have more storms, more lightning storms at the end of this week. So I know we've been talking about human ignited storms, but the lightning, we could be looking at storms in 3 places like we were
Right.
considering last week. So
Yep.
yeah, just
Yeah,
for that.
and then just to, thank you, then just to tie that out, you guys know that we had, Angelo from Byfield sent me the maps of the lightning strikes, and so I got on the radios and we all went out and checked, so yay for us. All 3 roads that showed lightning strikes were checked. Dean and I think Terry from Pearson area were checking Pearson and Lost Lake. I found out Diane, who's one of the Greenhorn leaders, and she lives on Lost Lake. She's the Greenhorn leader segment, the Lost Lake segment leader on the Greenhorn side. The lightning strike hit her property. That's where it was. So she ended up like, a bunch of damage was done, no appliances and electric stuff, but we were out searching for it. We kind of stopped at our boundaries and didn't see anything, but she told me the other night that she was ground zero for it. So it wasn't a joke, right? Bad for her, but the good news is those maps are correct. When it shows a lightning strike in the area, it's definitely there. All right. If nothing else, I want to say thank you guys. I hope this was valuable. It's the first time I've done anything like a Zoom debrief on the fire. And like I said, this is so intriguing. Just felt like everyone should be tracking along with these key learnings, because we can get better. Thank you, Gary, Terry, Chris, Dustin, Rose, Holly and Doug, Alice, Rick, Larry, Laura, Katie, and everybody who had to jump off. Have a good night, guys.
Thanks, Casey.
Bye.
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 Thank you, Casey.
You're so welcome. Bye.